Hey everyone, and welcome back to Battleborn. I've got an update to Ambra's Raging Furnace build for you, and I'm gonna change the way I do these guides a little bit. So on this video, we're gonna talk about her skills, her Helix options, and the gear that I like to bring. And then on some follow-up videos, I'm gonna take you through a match so you can see how the level progression works and how I deal with various situations with the build in real time. So, let's talk about these skills. First off, we've got Flame Shield. When Ambra's health falls below 20%, she is protected by a Flame Shield for 4 seconds that provides 300 Overshield. So this is sort of your get out of jail free card. If your health gets low, that Overshield is going to pop up automatically for you. And once you've activated Flame Shield, you can't have another one for 30 seconds. So you're going to have to avoid getting low again for 30 seconds, otherwise you won't have that Flame Shield to save your butt. And at level 5, we're going to augment it to also give us 30% movement speed when it comes up. So that just helps you get out to safety even more, which is fantastic. Alright, next up we got the Staff of Radiance. That's her main weapon. Ambra's Staff of Radiance drains health from a targeted enemy, returning 30% of the damage dealt to herself and generating heat. So she attacks with her staff. It makes a beam between herself and her target that does constant damage and gives her some life stealing in return. And it also generates heat, which she uses for her alternate attack. And at level 3, we're gonna augment that staff so it can fuel our sunspots. So it'll heal the sunspots so they can last longer or even indefinitely, as long as they're not getting used up too quickly. Alright, we've got her alternate attack now, Scorching Strikes. Ambra unleashes a series of melee strikes, spending heat to do up to 100% extra damage per hit. Heat strikes lower the cooldown of Sunspot by 1 second. So Scorching Strikes is a melee attack that uses up your heat. You don't need heat to use it, although using it without heat is kind of silly because heat gives it the good damage that it has. And the more heat you use, the more damage it's going to do. So if you have max heat, it's 100% extra damage per hit. If you have less, it's less damage. And the cooldown reduction on it is fantastic. So if you're in the heat of battle and you've got that heat stored up, just do some Scorching Strikes and you can reduce the Sunspot cooldown to get another Sunspot down and help you in the fight. And then at level 7, we're going to fundamentally change this skill. So it becomes a ranged attack that shoots fireballs. And it's still going to use up heat, but it's going to lose the cooldown reduction to your sunspots. So you get an awesome ranged attack, but you're going to lose that cooldown reduction to your sunspots. Alright, so speaking of sunspots, that's the next ability. Summons a sunspot that does 40 damage a second to nearby enemies and 60 healing to allies at the cost of its own health. Up to 2 sunspots can be active at once. So you drop down a sunspot, and it just automatically damages nearby enemies and heals nearby allies at the cost of its own health. And they go down quickly if it's doing a lot of things at once, even if you're fueling it with your staff. And at level 1, we're going to augment it so any enemies that are hit by the sunspot get a debuff on them that causes them to take 16% more damage for 4 seconds. At level 2, we're going to increase their healing over time by 30%. At level 6, we're going to add a reveal to it, which is great for countering Pendles, and we're going to increase its radius by 50%. And at level 8, we're going to increase their HP by 50%. And Sunspots have an 8-second cooldown, which is already fast, and don't forget the Scorching Strikes will reduce that cooldown by 1 second a strike. So you can really pump out a ton of Sunspots if you're using a lot of Scorching Strikes. Alright, next up we've got Solar Wind. This one has an 18-second cooldown. Channels a Fury Wind that quickly builds heat as it damages enemies in front of Ambra. Solar Wind does 80 damage per second for 3 seconds. And it's just a frontal attack right in front of you to do that damage over time. At level 4, we are going to fundamentally change this skill as well. We're going to change it so it slams. So Ambra's going to slam the ground 2 times, and it's going to throw enemies back. And at level 9, we're going to increase the radius of the skill by 40 seconds, which increases how far that slam's pushback will be triggered, which is really good, so you can hit both slams on your enemies pretty easily. Okay, and finally, we have her ultimate, Extinction event. And this one has a 60-second cooldown. Calls down a meteor at a targeted location, dealing 334 damage and leaving a scorching area of effect, dealing 41 damage a second over 5 seconds. Now, a lot of people complain about the ultimate, not so much as they used to because Amber's been buffed, but it's more of an area denial tool than an ability to actually hit your enemies with. If you can't hit them, it does a lot of damage and it's really nice, but it's more for just getting people out of an area and dropping that damage over time, deterring them from entering it again for quite some time. So you can just completely clear out an area with it. But if you can catch people with it, at level 10, you're going to augment it to have a 2-second stun, which is amazing. If you can catch someone with that, it's a huge hit. They're going to be in the damage over time, and they're going to be stunned for 2 seconds. So if your teammates are paying attention at all and ready to pounce, it's pretty much game over for whoever got caught unless there's some sort of tank. Alright, so that's sort of a breakdown of her skills. Let's jump into the Helix. Alright, so for level 1, for this build, you go to the left for Sunspotter. That's that damage amplification I was talking about earlier on your sunspots. But let's just talk about all of the Helix choices so you know what your other options can be. So you could go to the right here. That's going to add a damage over time to your Solar Wind, as well as revealing enemies that are hit by it. So you could use that as a Pendle's counter as well, but I don't really find it necessary. You can just wait till level 6 and get the reveal on the sunspots. I find that much more effective. Level 2, we go to the left with Blessing of the Sun for that 30% increase to health regeneration on the sunspots. The other options on this level I do not like at all. Soothing Sunlight up the middle makes it so if an ally or yourself walks on a sunspot, it's going to provide a healing burst and get consumed. And Solar Burst on the right does the same, except for enemies would walk over it, and it does damage to them and gets consumed. But neither of those are really good, because it's better to just have the Sunspot remain on the field, because those burst heals and burst damage isn't that great. Just having it out, it's going to do much more healing and or damage. So it's not really worth it to take those under any circumstances, as far as I'm concerned. Alright, level 3, we go up the middle with Stellar Ritual. Ambra Staff of Radiance can now be used to fuel your sunspots and get them healed up so they don't disappear on you. That's what I like to go with. Ceremonial Sacrifice on the left kind of turns your staff into sort of like a Miko beam, but at the cost of your own health. The damage it does to you isn't really that big of a deal, but I just don't like taking it because Ambra's not really a pocket healer, and I find her much better to just be actively in combat, dropping sunspots, doing damage, and keeping the enemy busy. And then on the right, you could go with Blood Drive to increase the lifesteal by 15% on your Staff of Radiance. But it really doesn't do that much damage, so it's not really that much lifesteal. I would much rather have the ability to keep my orbs up and running. So that's why I go up the middle on that one. Level 4, we go up the middle again with Ritual of Repulsion. That's that 2-slam attack I was talking about that pushes enemies back. Really good for just throwing somebody into a bad situation, like tossing someone into your team or tossing them off a cliff. Whatever you want to do, repositioning people can be really beneficial. So that's why I like to go with that. You've got Radiant Gale on the left, which I do not like at all. Enemies hit by Solar Wind are blown back, being repeatedly pushed back. It's kind of a weird pushback. I don't really like it. It's almost like a disruption more than anything. And then you've got Searing Wind on the right. The closer you are to your enemies, the more damage Ambra does. which is a good choice, but I don't like it anymore since they buffed the minion waves. It used to be really good at taking those out, but now they've got so much health, I don't really find it to be worth it anymore. I'd much rather have the utility you get from Ritual of Repulsion. Level 5, we go to the left with Cauterization. That gives you the movement speed buff when your Flame Shield comes up. The option on the right, as far as I'm concerned, is horrible. Flame Burst, when your Flame Shield expires, it explodes for some damage. But honestly, you should be nowhere near the enemy when your Flame Shield expires. Because if you are, you're probably dead because your health is low and now you've lost your Overshield. So I don't see any reason to ever take that one. Level 6, we go we go to the left, with Agile Anomaly. That gives you the Reveal, which is great for countering Pendles, and it increases the area of effect radius of your sunspots by 50%, which I really like for the healing. It's nice for damage too, but I mostly like it for the healing. Just gives me a better range for my allies to soak up my heals so they don't have to stand like right on top of my sunspots, which is never good in my opinion. You could go up the middle if you want with Solar Anomaly. That increases the amount of sunspots you can have by 1. But the cooldown is so short and they die so quickly, I don't really find that all that useful. If I want to keep my sunspots up, I can just fuel them with my staff. And then you can go to the right with Solar Storm, decreases Solar Wind's cooldown time by 20%. But I'm using Ritual of Repulsion, and I don't use it all that often to be honest, so the cooldown doesn't really help me. So I don't particularly like that. I much prefer having the Reveal and the increased radius on those sunspots. Alright, level 7. I go up the middle with Radiant Halberd. That shoots the fireballs like I was talking about earlier. Gives you the only ranged option that Ambra has. So I really like that. Lets me hang back, be more of a healer, and do ranged damage. So I don't have to put myself in so much danger to be helpful to my team, at least on the damage front. You could go to the left. That's actually a really good option, especially if you don't have your legendary. I should say that the only reason I go up the middle for Radiant Halberd is because I have the legendary and can throw constant fireballs. If I didn't have the legendary, I would definitely be going to the left with Flame Staff, which adds a lifesteal to your Scorching Strikes, which gives you a ton of sustain. You already had good sustain, but now you've got a ton. So that's a really good option. You could go up the right with Radiant Spear. I think this is terrible. It turns your Staff of Radiance, your Scorching Strike, into one big hit. But to be honest, the hit's not that big, and it's got a huge charge up, so it can be difficult to land. So I just don't find that Helix choice to be worth it at all. Alright, level 8. We go to the right with Fan the Flames. That increases the health of your sunspots by 50%, which equals more damage and more healing out of them. You could lower the cooldown on the left if you wanted to, but the cooldown time's already so short that I just don't really find that one to be worth it. So I much prefer to increase their health. Level 9, we go to the left with Howling Wind. That increases Solar Wind's area of effect by 40%. The only reason I take this is because it makes it very easy for me to hit both slams of the Ritual of Repulsion. So that's the only reason I take it. It just makes that easier, and that's a ton of damage if you land both of those slams. You could go up the right for Sweltering Wind to increase Solar Wind's damage by 15%. But for me, it's more of a utility skill. So I prefer to increase the radius. But you could increase the damage if you like, but you're going to have a much more difficult time landing both of those slams. Alright, and then level 10, we go up the left to get the 2-second stun on our ultimate, which is fantastic if you land it. On the right, I don't really find it all that great, but I guess it's good for area denial. It increases the damage over time that remains by an extra 3 seconds, which I think knocks it up to 8 seconds, I believe. It's 5 seconds by default, if I'm remembering correctly, so that brings it up to 8. It's not bad, but I would much prefer the stun. The stun is basically a death sentence for whoever you catch with it. Okay, so those are the Helix choices I make. Let's jump over to the gear. Now, since they added Face Off, I have 3 different sets I like to take for each character now. I've got this expensive set right here. So this is what I take into Incursion and Meltdown. First item gives me heal power. Then we've got her legendary for skill damage, heal power, and Staff of Radiance slowly generates its own heat, which allows you to shoot constant fireballs because of your level 7 mutation. And then I go with the Symbiotic Gauntlet for attack damage and maximum health increase, and then another attack damage increase based on your current max health, and you're a healer, so you'll usually be at max health. So you should normally be getting that boost. And attack damage affects your fireballs from your level 7 mutation, Radiant Halberd, I believe it's called. So having that attack damage makes your fireballs hurt all the more, and that's why I like that. And the health increase is really nice for Ambra. So this is the set I take for Incursion and Meltdown. If I go into Face Off, I have mostly the same set. The only difference is I go with a white attack damage glove instead of a legendary. So I'm reducing the cost of the items because it's a shorter game mode and there's less crystals to go around. And then Capture is all white items because also a short game mode, but way less crystals to get. So I've got the heal power, a white skill damage item, and once again that white duelist glove for the attack damage. Alright, so that is how I set it up. That is the updates to the Raging Furnace build for Ambra. And like I said, over the next couple days I'm going to show you some matches with her and actually commentate them, because I usually just show a match just without any commentating whatsoever. But I'm going to walk you through them, show you how I deal with the different allies and different enemies and how the level progression works and all that good stuff. So we'll be getting to that in the next videos, but that's going to do it for this one. So I hope you guys enjoy the update to this build. Take Ambra out for a new spin and all of her awesome new badass glory, because she's so much better than she used to be, even though I loved her in her previous iteration. But yeah, that's going to do it for this video. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.